The marketplace of Eldermire was in chaos. Merchants scattered as the portal master's guards swept through the trading halls, upending stalls and confiscating portal keys. The usual bustle of commerce had given way to panic as traders from a dozen realms found themselves suddenly stranded. Rose woke to the sound of screaming echoing through the stone corridors. She was on her feet instantly, her whip in hand, when Draven burst through her door. "Father's shut down all the portals," he said quickly, blood spattering his expensive clothes. "He's convinced someone's been tampering with the keys, stealing portal magic. The guards are already executing anyone they suspect of involvement." Rose moved to her window, watching the scene unfold below. The great portal chambers that usually hummed with activity were dark, their magical doorways sealed. Traders and merchants clustered in frightened groups as guards systematically worked their way through the complex. "How many innocent people will die because of your father's paranoia?" she asked quietly. "This isn't about paranoia." Draven's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "He found the forbidden books in my study. This is about power and punishment." "Your books triggered this?" Rose turned from the window, her eyes narrowing. "Or did he find something else?" Draven ran a hand through his dishevelled hair. "The books were just the beginning. He found my notes, my research about breaking his control over the portals. He knows someone's been helping me." His eyes met hers. "If he connects you to this—" Below, another scream cut through the air. Rose watched as guards dragged a merchant from his stall, the man's protests lost in the growing chaos. "How many keys does your father control?" she asked, moving to retrieve her armor. "All of them. That's the point. He controls every portal, every trade route." Draven watched as she began strapping on her armor. "What are you doing? We need to run." "Running won't stop this." Rose secured her whip at her side. "Your father's paranoia will destroy Eldermire's trade, strand hundreds in the wrong realms, maybe start wars between worlds. Someone needs to stop him." "You can't be serious. This is suicide." Rose checked the last buckle on her armor. "Maybe, but I'm done letting men like your father decide who lives and dies. If you want to be a martyr, fine." Draven moved toward the door. "But I'm not dying for this." "No." Rose's voice stopped him. "You started this with your schemes and forbidden books. You don't get to run while others pay for your ambitions." His face twisted with something between fear and anger. "You don't understand what he's capable of." "I understand perfectly." Rose stepped closer, her armored footsteps echoing in the chamber. "Your father rules through fear. He makes examples of people, breaks them so others won't dare challenge him." Her eyes hardened. "But fire doesn't fear anything." Below, the chaos was spreading. The shouts of guards mingled with the cries of merchants and the crash of overturned stalls. The very foundations of Eldermire seemed to tremble with the growing panic. "The portal chamber," Rose said, checking her weapons one final time. "That's where he'll be?" Draven nodded slowly. "The main chamber. He'll be trying to determine which portals were compromised." "Then that's where we're going." She moved to the door, then paused. "Are you coming, or are you going to run like a coward?" Rose paused before opening the door. "I need to get something first." "We don't have time for—" Draven started, but she was already moving. "The servants' passage," she said, pulling aside a wall hanging to reveal a narrow doorway. "Come or don't, but I'm not leaving without it." The hidden corridors were dark and tight, forcing them to move single file. Rose counted the turns, silently measuring their descent. The crystal's hiding place wasn't far, but every second they spent in these passages was another second the chaos above grew worse. She found the loose stone exactly where she'd left it, the crystal's warmth greeting her touch as she retrieved it. Its pulse seemed stronger now, as if it too sensed the coming confrontation. "What is that?" Draven's voice was barely a whisper behind her. Rose tucked the crystal securely against her armor. "Insurance," she said simply. "Now, let's go have a word with your father about portal control." The trip through the servants' passages was tense. The distant sounds of chaos muffled by stone walls. The crystal pulsed against Rose's armor, in time with her heartbeat, its warmth spreading through her like liquid courage. "There's a service entrance to the main chamber," Draven whispered as they neared their destination. "The guards won't be watching it." "How many men will your father have with him?" "His personal guard, at least 6, maybe more if he's feeling particularly paranoid." Draven's voice shook slightly. "Rose, even with your fire magic." "It's not just fire magic anymore." She touched the crystal through her armor. "Your father wanted to see real power. He's about to." They emerged into a narrow corridor just off the main chamber. Rose could hear voices ahead, the portal master's commanding tone rising above others as he issued orders. The crystal's warmth intensified, as if responding to the proximity of other portal magic. "Last chance to run," she told Draven, without looking at him. The main chamber was a maelstrom of portal energy. The portal master stood at its center, surrounded by his guards, his hands weaving complex patterns as he manipulated the magical gates. Each portal frame pulsed with unstable light, their normal smooth surfaces rippling like disturbed water. Rose pressed herself against the wall near the servants' entrance, studying the scene. The crystal burned against her armor, its power responding to the wild portal magic that filled the air. Beside her, Draven's breathing was shallow, his eyes darting between his father and the nearest exit. "6 guards," he whispered, "and father's channeling raw portal energy. We should—" "Your Grace." Rose stepped out of hiding, cutting off Draven's warning. Her voice carried across the chamber, steady and clear. "I believe we need to discuss your definition of justice." The portal master turned slowly, his hands still crackling with energy. His eyes narrowed as he took in her armor, the whip at her side. "Ah, the fire mage, come to make your position even worse?" Behind her, still hidden in the shadows, Draven began moving silently along the wall. "Worse?" Rose let a small flame dance across her fingers. "You're executing innocent people based on paranoid suspicions. I'd say we're well past worse." The portal master's laugh held no humor. "Innocent? Someone has been tampering with portal magic, stealing secrets that could tear realms apart. The guilty will be punished." "And how many will you kill before you find them?" Rose moved further into the chamber, noting how the guards shifted their positions. The crystal pulsed against her side, its rhythm matching the unstable portals surrounding them. "As many as necessary." His eyes narrowed. "Though perhaps we should start with those closest to the source. My son's new apprentice, appearing so mysteriously through unauthorized channels." Behind him, Rose caught a glimpse of Draven. He had reached one of the portal frames, his hands moving in patterns she hadn't seen before. His father, focused on Rose, didn't notice. "Maybe," she said carefully, buying time, "you should look closer to home for your traitors." "Closer to home?" The portal master's smile turned cruel. "You think I don't know my own son's ambitions? His pathetic attempts at rebellion?" Portal energy crackled around his hands as he gestured to the chaos below. "This display of power isn't just about finding traitors. It's about teaching my son a final lesson about control." Rose caught movement in her peripheral vision. Draven's hands were glowing now, tracing complex patterns into the portal frame. Whatever he was planning, she needed to keep his father distracted. "And what lesson is that?" she asked, letting her own power build slowly, fire crawling up her arms. "That true power isn't about knowledge or skill." The portal master's voice dropped dangerously. "It's about being willing to destroy everything, to maintain control." The guards moved closer, weapons ready. Behind them, Draven's magic began to pulse visibly, though his father remained oblivious. The crystal at Rose's side grew almost painfully hot. "No," Rose said quietly. "True power is about being willing to burn it all down to be free." The first guard moved before anyone spoke another word. Rose's whip cracked through the air, wreathed in flames that burned brighter than normal, the crystal's power bleeding into her own. The guard went down screaming as fire consumed his armor. The Portal Master's hands shot up, portal energy surging toward her like a tidal wave. Rose rolled left, coming up with flames spiraling around her. The crystal pulsed, and suddenly her fire burned blue-white, hot enough to melt stone. "Impressive!" the Portal Master snarled, weaving more power between his fingers. "But let me show you what real magic looks like." The air itself seemed to tear as he gestured, micro-portals opening around Rose like hungry mouths. She barely managed to dodge as they snapped shut, each capable of severing limbs. Behind his father, Draven's magic had begun to interact with the portal frame. The usually smooth surface was rippling violently, colours swirling in patterns that hurt to look at. "Father!" he called suddenly, his voice ringing with triumph. "Let me show you what I've learned about real power." The Portal Master spun toward his son's voice, his eyes widening as he saw what Draven had done. The portal frame was pulsing with sickly light, its surface crawling with runes that should never have been combined. "You fool!" the Portal Master shouted. "Those sigils are incompatible. You'll tear reality." Draven's laugh cut him off. "That's exactly the point, Father. Let's see how well you control things when there are no barriers left between realms." The chamber began to vibrate as portal energy surged out of control. Rose could feel the crystal responding, its power building to a fever pitch against her skin. The guards scattered as cracks began appearing in the very air around them. "You have no idea what you're doing," the Portal Master snarled, trying to counter his son's magic with his own. "This will destroy everything." "No, Father." Draven's voice was almost gleeful as he poured more power into the destabilizing portal. "This will free everything." Then the spell backfired. The portal magic rebounded on Draven with catastrophic force. His triumphant expression turned to horror as the power he'd tried to control surged back through him. Rose watched as reality itself seemed to warp around him, the energies he'd unleashed eating into his flesh like acid. His scream was unlike anything Rose had ever heard, the sound of a man being unmade. The Portal Master moved with desperate speed, trying to contain the cascade of failing magic, but it was too late. The original portal frame shattered, sending shards of reality tearing through the chamber. Each fragment opened its own unstable gateway, turning the air into a maze of crackling portals. "What have you done?" the Portal Master roared at his son's crumpled form. "You've doomed us all." The crystal at Rose's side was burning now, responding to the chaos. She could feel it pulling at her, trying to connect with the wild portal energy filling the chamber. The very foundations of Eldermire groaned as reality buckled under the strain. Draven lay writhing on the floor, half his face torn away by the backfired spell, the other half twisted in a rictus of pain and madness. The chamber was coming apart. Portal energy tore through stone and flesh with equal indifference, while the crystal's power surged through Rose's body like liquid fire. She stumbled as the floor beneath her cracked, reality splintering in every direction. Through the chaos, she saw the Portal Master making one last desperate attempt to contain the damage. But his son's madness had unleashed something beyond even his control. Draven's ruined form still twitched on the ground, his remaining eye fixed on Rose with a hatred that promised future vengeance. The crystal pulsed once violently, and Rose felt herself being pulled toward one of the fractured portals. She tried to fight it, but the combination of wild portal magic and the crystal's power was too strong. Her last glimpse of Eldermire was of its mighty walls beginning to collapse, the Portal Master's face twisted in fury as his realm crumbled around him. Then she was falling through darkness, the crystal burning against her like a star, her consciousness fading as reality itself seemed to tear apart around her. The last thing she felt was blood trickling down her side from where portal shards had cut deep. Rose fell through a void that had no end and no beginning. The crystal's heat was the only constant, as realities blurred past her like streaks of paint in the darkness. Blood floated around her in crimson droplets, suspended in the nothingness between worlds. Fragments of Eldermire's destruction followed her through the void, echoes of screams, the sound of reality tearing, Draven's mangled face twisted in hatred. The portal energy had cut deep, not just into her flesh but into her very being. She could feel herself coming undone, much as Eldermire had crumbled into ruin. The crystal pulsed weakly against her now, its power dimming as consciousness began to slip away. She had escaped another prison, but at what cost? And where was she falling to? As darkness claimed her, Rose's last coherent thought was of how much she still had to learn about power, about betrayal, about survival. If she lived through this fall between worlds, she would never be so unprepared again. The void swallowed her whole, and Rose Emberheart disappeared into the space between realities, leaving behind a ruined Eldermire and a disfigured enemy who would never forget her name. Silas was making his usual rounds through the lower districts when he felt it, a surge of power that made his horns tingle. The sensation led him to a narrow alley where reality itself seemed to ripple before depositing a crumpled form onto the cobblestones. He approached cautiously, his large frame moving with surprising grace for a Minotaur. The figure was small, a woman by the look of her, wearing scorched leather armor, human or so she appeared, though the residual energy surrounding her suggested otherwise. Blood pooled beneath her from multiple wounds that looked like they'd been made by shards of glass. Something pulsed beside her, a crystal that radiated power unlike anything he'd felt before. But it was her face that caught his attention, delicate features twisted in pain, yet holding a strength that called to something deep within him. Silas knew he should alert the authorities. Mysterious arrivals were always suspicious, especially ones carrying powerful artifacts. But something made him hesitate. Perhaps it was the way she seemed to be running from something. Or perhaps it was simply that he couldn't bear the thought of leaving her helpless in this alley. Consciousness returned slowly. Rose's first awareness was of softness beneath her. A real bed, not the cold cobblestones she vaguely remembered falling onto. Her body ached, but the sharp pain of her wounds had been dulled to a manageable throb. She opened her eyes carefully, taking in her surroundings without moving. The room was simple but clean, sunlight filtering through gauzy curtains. She was wearing a soft tunic that wasn't her own, but as she shifted slightly, she felt the crystal's familiar warmth under her pillow. Her armor and other belongings had been cleaned and folded neatly on a nearby chair, the leather restored and bloodstains removed. Someone had tended to her with surprising care and consideration. Heavy footsteps approached the door, too heavy for a human. Rose tensed, but her body protested any sudden movement. The door opened, revealing a young Minotaur carrying a tray. His massive frame filled the doorway, but his movements were carefully gentle as he noticed she was awake. "You're awake." His voice was deep but soft, as if trying not to startle her. "The healer said you might be soon." He set the tray down on a small table, maintaining a respectful distance from the bed. Rose pushed herself up slightly, wincing at the pull of bandaged wounds. "How long?" 3 days, he gestured to a cup on the tray. "There's tea if you'd like. Something light to eat as well." She studied him carefully. Young for a Minotaur, but still imposing. Yet, there was something in his bearing that spoke of gentleness rather than threat. "You found me?" He nodded. "In an alley? You were—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "You seemed to fall out of nowhere. I brought you here, had a healer tend to your wounds." His eyes met hers directly, honest and clear. "Your belongings are all there, untouched, including what was hidden beneath your armor." Rose's hand instinctively moved toward the pillow where she could feel the crystal's presence. "Why help me?" The Minotaur's expression softened slightly. "Because you needed it." He moved toward the door. "I'm Silas. Rest. Eat if you can. We can talk more when you're stronger. Days turned to weeks as Rose regained her strength. Silas proved to be as consistent as he was kind, checking on her daily with food, fresh bandages, and a quiet presence that demanded nothing in return. At first, she watched him warily, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But his care remained steady, his massive hands surprisingly gentle when helping change her bandages. He never pressed for information about where she'd come from or what had happened to her, though she sometimes caught him looking at her with quiet curiosity. By the third week, she could walk the length of the room without pain. Silas had brought her books when he noticed her restlessness and fresh clothes that fit her perfectly. The crystal remained safely under her pillow, though she sometimes caught him glancing at it when he thought she wasn't looking. "Your wounds are healing well," he said one evening as he brought her dinner. "The healer says the portal energy burns should fade completely." Rose looked up from her book. "You know about portal magic?" Silas's expression remained carefully neutral. "I know enough to recognize its effects." He set down the tray. "Just as I know enough not to ask questions when someone appears out of thin air wearing combat armor." "Is it true what they say about humans?" Silas asked one evening, the question seemingly slipping out before he could stop it. He immediately looked embarrassed, his large hands fidgeting with the empty dinner tray. Rose paused in combing her hair, catching his reflection in the small mirror he'd provided. "And what do they say about humans?" "I've only read about them in books," he admitted, his curiosity overtaking his usual restraint. "They're supposed to be fragile, short-lived, but you—" He gestured vaguely at her healing wounds. "You're stronger than any human should be." Rose set down the comb, turning to face him. "What makes you think I'm human?" "You look human," he said carefully. "But then again, you appeared out of nowhere with portal burns and a crystal that pulses with power. So perhaps you're something else entirely." His honesty was refreshing after the layers of deception she'd left behind in Eldermire. "Perhaps I am." "You're in Concordia," Silas explained, settling into a chair that creaked under his weight. "A realm where all races can coexist in peace." Rose absorbed this information, her mind already mapping out implications. "Concordia," she tested the name. "I've heard whispers of it, a place where old feuds are set aside." "More than that," Silas said, a hint of pride in his deep voice. "It's neutral ground. No fighting, no power plays, no revenge schemes. The rules are simple but absolute." "And you enforce these rules?" Silas nodded. "It's why I was patrolling when I found you." Though his eyes held a gentle humour. "People appearing out of thin air isn't covered in our usual regulations." "How does it work?" Rose asked, genuinely curious. After Eldermire's rigid control and political games, the idea of true neutrality seemed almost impossible. "Each district has its purpose," Silas explained. "Markets where all races can trade, gathering places for diplomatic meetings, residential areas where different species live side by side." His expression grew serious. "The peace is maintained by more than just enforcers, it's maintained by mutual benefit. Everyone who comes to Concordia has something to gain from its stability." "And what happens to those who break the peace?" "They're escorted out," Silas said simply. "No violence, no revenge, just removal. The right to stay in Concordia is valuable enough that few risk losing it." Rose thought of the crystal beneath her pillow, of the chaos she'd left behind in Eldermire. And if someone arrived with complicated circumstances? Silas met her gaze steadily. "Concordia doesn't ask about the past. What matters is how you behave while you're here." "And you?" Rose asked carefully. "A young Minotaur working as an enforcer, that seems unusual." Silas's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "About as unusual as a human appearing out of nowhere with portal burns and magical artifacts." Rose couldn't help but return the slight smile. His directness was refreshing after Eldermire's layers of deception. "Fair point." My kind are known for strength, he continued, adjusting his position in the chair. But strength isn't just about physical power. Sometimes it's about knowing when not to use it. He gestured to the peaceful street outside her window. Concordia taught me that? Rose watched him thoughtfully. There was wisdom in his words that reminded her of how poorly strength had been wielded in Eldermire. The Portal Master's iron control, Draven's desperate grab for power, both had led to destruction. How does someone, she paused, choosing her words carefully, become part of Concordia? It depends, Silas said thoughtfully. Some are born here. Some come seeking sanctuary or trade opportunities. Others, his eyes met hers carefully, find their way here by accident, only to discover it's where they needed to be. And they're all just accepted? As long as they follow the rules, he shifted, leaning forward slightly. There are procedures, of course. Registration with the district authority, choosing a residence, finding a trade or occupation. His expression softened. But first, people need to heal, find their footing. Rose heard the gentle offer in his words. And if someone needed time to find their footing, then they might find that their current accommodation could be arranged more permanently. Silas stood, his massive frame blocking the evening light from the window. No one would rush them to make decisions while they're still recovering. The kindness in his voice made her throat tight. After Kalian's manipulation and Draven's betrayal, such straightforward compassion felt almost foreign. Once she could walk comfortably, Rose began accompanying Silas on his rounds. The markets of Concordia were unlike anything she'd seen. Even Eldermire's portal-linked trading halls couldn't compare to the diversity here. She found herself drawn to the negotiation tables, where beings from different realms bargained and bartered. A vampire lord trading centuries-old wines for a fairy's enchanted seeds. A dwarf merchant haggling with a sphinx over the price of ancient riddles. You enjoy watching them, Silas observed one afternoon as they passed a particularly heated negotiation between a dragon in human form and a group of sea merchants. It's fascinating, Rose admitted, noting how each party tried to hide their true interest. Everyone playing their little games, even here where power plays are forbidden. Trading isn't about power, Silas corrected gently. It's about value. Finding what each party truly needs. Rose thought about that, watching the subtle tells of the traders. The flicker of eyes, the shift of posture, the carefully chosen words. Here was a different kind of power, one that didn't need fire or force. As days passed, Rose found herself creating a mental map of Concordia's true currency. Information. Every trade carried whispers of other realms. Every merchant brought stories along with their goods. She learned to sit quietly in the corner of trading halls, watching, listening, cataloguing every detail. The Dragon Lord's daughter eloped with a phoenix, she told Silas one evening as they walked home. That's why he was so desperate for those flame-proof scrolls. Silas glanced down at her, his expression curious. And how did you learn that? People talk when they think no one's listening. Rose smiled slightly. Especially when they're trying to get the better end of a deal. You're becoming quite the observer, Silas noted, though something in his tone suggested concern. Knowledge isn't power here, she assured him, understanding his worry. It's just interesting, like watching a complex dance. But they both knew she was learning more than just gossip. Every overheard conversation, every observed negotiation was teaching her something about how information could flow without violence, how influence could be wielded without force.
Well, you found your way to the end, haven't you? That must mean you're curious, and we love curiosity around here. Before you vanish into the ether, take a moment to subscribe. It's just a click, and trust me, you'll want to stay in the loop for what comes next. And while you're at it, give the video a like. The energy exchange is good for you. Hit that notification bell too. You wouldn't want to miss out on any of our magical misadventures. Who knows what I might conjure up next? Alright, off you go. But remember, I'll know if you didn't subscribe. See you on the other side.